There we go. Oh, here we go. It's working.
I believe.
It's working.
I believe.
Yep, the numbers are coming in.
What's the format gonna be? You want me to talk a while and then we do Q&A? How do you want to do it?
If we could save 20 minutes at the end for Q&A a little bit, yeah.
Okay, good. Our time frame is from
plan to do that
from 7 to 8.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah, we can do that.
We can do that.
I have questions, but I probably have too many because I know once you get started, you'll take us on a journey. So
yeah, well, look, I'll aim for 40 minutes.
Yeah.
So we do have a good 20 minutes for the interchange, which is important.
Right. Okay.
So as a clergyman, you get to go first. By the way, y'all have exactly the same kind of white beards.
Isn't that weird?
You show up on Zoom.
Right. I know it's a problem. Yeah. It's kind of interesting.
Like most things in life. Okay.
Right. We get that comment a lot.
Right. I remember talking with Fleming Rutledge, who's a woman who's an Episcopal priest, and she said, I have a real trouble with men with beards. They all look the same to me. She said, I can't tell them apart.
It's only so much you can do out of your chin, right? But just at a little distance on Zoom, it just looks like white.
Yeah, sure.
Like you put shaving cream on, and you go, now look at these two.
I can zoom in a little bit and show you.
Well, yeah. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We're going to let folks continue to gather. And I know a number of you were sort of doubting whether or not we could pull this off, but we did. And but we'll join in and we'll get things going in just a few minutes. I will say that Sister Helen and Neil and I have decided we need to do this weekly now. We're going to hang out every Wednesday.
Can they hear me too, or only you?
Oh, they can hear you.
Ooh, hey y'all. Coming to you from New Orleans, where it's been warm. And the birds are coming to my bird feeder, and the flowers are blooming still in January.
Excellent. That's here in Houston.
Where are y'all located? Where are y'all?
We're in Houston, so we're just up the road from you.
All close.
Yeah, we're neighbors.
God, it's lovely to live in the South. Thank you, Jesus, for putting me in the South. I mean, that snow looks beautiful on Christmas cards, but if you haven't been in it and you try to get anywhere, we had 6 nuns in Billings, Montana, where I go in the summer to write. And in the space of 2 months, 4 of them went down on black ice.
Oh, no.
One broke a
that's
rib,
not good.
One broke a pelvis, one, I mean, it's bad, that ice.
Yeah,
I'm just glad to be on terra firma in Verdun, Louisiana. Houston's
I get it.
much like us.
It is. I was born in Louisiana, so that's where I was born in West Monroe, Monroe area up, and I grew up in Louisiana, so it's a special place to me.
You know how to cook good?
I can cook good.
All right. Okay, and I know you eat well.
We can do it. That's right.
With your little filled out face and all.
My little rosy cheeks. No. All right. I think I'm gonna wait just another minute. I still see people coming in, and then I'll do an introduction, and then I'll turn it over to Neil, who will get us started, and the two of y'all can begin that. There are a couple of comments in here so far. Thank goodness, my sentiments exactly. Thank goodness for being in the South.
All right.
So, excellent. Well, I think I want to go ahead and go because this is such a gift to have you with us. And so I want to extend a welcome again with you to be here with us tonight. And to do that, I want to first also welcome everybody that's joining us tonight. We have people from all over the United States. We have folks from here in Houston, of course, from Palmer. And I do know that we have folks joining us from all over the country and for what is going to be a really special treat tonight. Let me do the bio. Sister Helen's bio.
Go short.
bio.
Go short. Don't do the long one. Don't.
I have one that I received one that says short bio.
Okay, good. Do that one.
Okay, I'll do that one. It's still a little long, but I've got to do it all. Sister Helen Prejean is known around the world for her tireless work against the death penalty. She has been instrumental in sparking national dialogue on capital punishment and in shaping the Catholic Church's vigorous opposition to all executions. Born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in the 1930s, Sister Helen grew up in the segregated Jim Crow South. At the age of 18, she joined the Sisters of St. Joseph. She worked as a high school teacher and a religious education director in New Orleans before moving into the St. Thomas Housing Project in the early 80s. In 1982, Sister Helen began corresponding with Patrick Sonnier, is that right?
Close enough.
Close enough, who had been sentenced to death for the murder of 2 teenagers. 2 years later, when Patrick was put to death in the electric chair, Sister Helen was there to witness his execution. In the following months, she became spiritual advisor to another death row inmate, Robert Lee Willie, who was to meet the same fate as Patrick. After witnessing these executions, Sister Helen realized that this lethal ritual would remain unchallenged unless its secrecy was stripped away. And so she sat down and wrote a book, Dead Man Walking, an eyewitness account of the death penalty in the United States. This book ignited a national debate on capital punishment and spawned an Academy Award-winning movie, a play, and an opera. Sister Helen's second book, The Death of Innocents, an eyewitness account of wrongful executions, was published in 2004. And her third book, River of Fire, My Spiritual Journey, in August 2019. She is currently collaborating on a graphic retelling of Dead Man Walking to be published by Random House. And so, Sister Helen, welcome. We are thrilled you are here. And now I'm going to turn this over to Reverend Neil Willard.
Great.
I'm going to turn, just so folks know, I'm going to turn my screen off and I will manage the chat box and the Q&A. So if you have a question, I will manage those things. Thank you so much.
Leave some time at the end for questions and answers. So thank you, Roger. Sister Helen, it's really a great honor to have you with us tonight for this conversation. And I know that, like Roger said, there's folks from my church who are here, folks from many other places across the country. And I'm sure that, this is a controversial topic. And I'm sure that there are people, who have all different opinions about this. So I just want to acknowledge that up front. But I'm always fascinated by how people end up doing what they do or living where they live. You were just talking about New Orleans, because a lot of us probably, for a lot of us, there have been one or two or maybe many surprises along the way. And so whether we're a baptized Christian or not in a religious community or a pastor of a congregation, there are things that that we're called to that we might never have imagined that we would be led to. But then we suddenly find ourselves standing in a place or in a moment because we believe God's called us to be there. So how did you become a Roman Catholic nun at a time when that might have looked very different than it does today, and then end up eventually talking about the death penalty in the United States and walking closely with those on death row?
Well, Reverend Neil, therein hangs a tale. And I'm glad to be with all you folks to talk about it. I think the best thing that we share with each other is when we share the inner experiences we've had of consciousness and conscience that move us and make us who we are. And you're right, Neil, the death penalty is hugely controversial because let's look at it for what it is. Murderers do cold-blooded killing of innocent human beings. The first man I was with that I accompanied as spiritual advisor on death row, Patrick Sonnier, with his brother in cold blood, had placed a .22 rifle to the heads of 2 teenage kids and shot them down at point blank range in a harvested sugarcane field in Louisiana on the night of November 4th, 1977. those kids, once alive and vibrant and budding, were now dead in a sugarcane field, and they had been killed at the hands of two men who had killed them in cold blood. And what are we to do with that? I mean, when we stand in the presence of that, who cannot be outraged at the killing of innocent human beings? And here we go then on what the death penalty involves, because there is in all of us, and I had to face this honestly when I wrote Dead Man Walking. I had to face it. If somebody killed my mother or my sister, I can't say that I'm going to invoke, oh yeah, Jesus said to forgive, and I'm all there, and we cannot escape the journey of conversion that is to be ours if we're going to go to a place where we can say, I forgive them. Who can say that? A lot of victims' families I know can never use those words, forgive. Sure. They feel too much like those words mean, I condone what's happening. It's okay. You kill my mother. It's okay. But it doesn't mean okay. And therein lies the journey. So Neil, if I could I just share a little bit about the journey that's in River of Fire and,
please do.
How I did awaken to the gospel.
That book is about, well, tell us what that book's about. I've heard a little bit about it, but.
Man, I'm dying to tell you about this. I thought you'd never ask about this. The book.
There it is.
Is River of Fire. On becoming an activist is what the paperback has. The hardback had on my spiritual journey, both of which are true. So here I am, a nun, as you asked, Neil, at the age of 18. What do I know? You're 18 years old. You're going to join the sisterhood. And these were nuns who had taught me. And God, they were dynamic. They were faith-filled. They were funny. They taught us to use our minds, to question things. At St. Joseph Academy in Baton Rouge, where I went to school in the 50s, I learned to do public speaking. I learned to write. I learned to punctuate blooming sentences, knowing the difference between a semicolon and a comma, which is very nuanced. So then one day when I went to write books, I knew how to write. And every day of my life to do public speaking, I knew how to speak and not be, all intimidated. How am I being received and all that stuff, to just be able to share. They gave me that. I wanted to join them, and I did. I knew what I wanted, and I wanted a life where I got to tell you in all honesty, and I'm from the South, most Southern girls at the academy, I remember us talking, they were going to LSU for husbandry, not the agricultural animal thing, but to get a husband. Because what you did as a woman, was you got to be married. That's what you do as a woman. I never could really see that too much. And I see these dynamic nuns, and I joined them. 18.
You once told someone, I believe I saw you talking with someone, trying to describe to someone else who's not familiar with this, what's counterintuitive about it. It looks like you're taking away freedom, but really you're doing this to be a free person in a sense, and for your particular calling. Was that?
Well, that is a unique faith perspective, Reverend Neil. Because looking at it from the outside,
it doesn't look like that, right? Yeah.
Here's a young woman, 18. She's going into a convent. She's going to dress in medieval garb and never make another decision in her life.
Right.
She's going to practice blind obedience to a superior who's going to tell her God's will. That's what it entails. And so, what do you mean, a life of freedom? What kind of freedom is that? Tell me. So what happens is, though, think of life as a current in a river. And that's why I chose the image of river in River of Fire, because it's always flowing. It's always changing. We are always flowing and changing. What we call our selfhood is very mercurial. It's changing always. Who am I? What am I thinking? What am I feeling? What am I doing? We're always unfurling, actually. And so by joining this life, though, I put myself in the practice, a spiritual practice, which has served me well up to this very day. That it was based on, steeped in prayer, quiet, meditation, spiritual reading, kind of watering the roots of the tree of activism that was going to be in our lives, in my life. And so that was before Vatican II. It was purely, let me tell you, blind obedience. You didn't have to think another thought in your life about what you ought to do. You just listen to Mother Superior, listen to the teaching church. You knew what you had to do, which, when you look at it, is a child's obedience, because we are thinking, critiquing human beings. We constantly seek to know the meaning of our lives. And then in the Catholic Church happened, as I tell in River of Fire, Vatican II,
Right.
an ecumenical council. Y'all, I mean, I know maybe a lot of y'all are Episcopalians and all, but did y'all follow this thing of Vatican II when it happened in the church and what reforms it set in place?
It was before my time, but I had a teacher at Yale Divinity School who was a Lutheran observer there. So,
Yeah, Lutheran Observer. That's
yeah.
a plus. It's the first Catholic ecumenical council, y'all, that was ever held, whose sole purpose wasn't to condemn other heretics,
Right.
like Episcopalians for a start, and everybody else in the world. The whole thing about Vatican II was from this little rotund guy who had been elected, John the 23rd, who the Curia people in the Curia, the enclave of power in the Vatican, had decided would be a good interim pope. Besides, he was overweight and he smoked. He wouldn't last long. Let's put him in, and then we can get our guy in to keep doing business as usual in the Catholic Church as we have done it. Well, lo and behold, and here's the Holy Spirit flapping her wings on all this human process going on, where you have John the 23rd, the rotund smoking pope, who said after 2 months in the papacy, I was praying and the Holy Spirit kind of nudged me to say, maybe we need to have an ecumenical council that doesn't aim at just condemning heretics, but just to open the church to the modern world, open the windows, open the doors, to look in at what is happening in science, in modern life, the joys and sufferings of all the people, that we can participate in that. And lo and behold, he inaugurates this Vatican II Council, which was the first Reformed council in the church that was ever aimed at just updating our faith and the meaning of our faith to be able to relate to the modern world. And you want to know what? Nobody took the bit in their teeth of reforms of Vatican II than nuns. Because here we were, women of the church, prayerful, serving others. We staffed the schools, we staffed the hospitals. We got a pittance of a wage, but it was all about church service. And here's Vatican II telling us, and the other people of God, the laity, which the first thing Vatican II defined as the church was the people. The people. We'd always thought the church was was the hierarchy. You still hear
Sure.
people today saying, I'm mad as hell about the church. And what they really mean is the bishop.
Right.
Bishop. That's not the people. And so the people were given the authority to live the gospel of Jesus. And as nuns, we took that full stride and began to live it. And I was part of that.
How did you end up connected to, how did you walk from there to walking beside someone on death row? How
The
did
good
you end
thing I
up?
like about you, Neil, is you ask the questions that move the narrative forward. He must be a writer in his soul, this guy. Okay. Yeah. I mean, look, it's all an unfurling of grace. You become become conscious and you become aware. Grace wakes us up. And that's what happened with me. So I come out of my beautiful, pious nunhood, where I prayed for the suffering poor people of the world, asked God to solve the problems of the suffering world, not rolling up my sleeves or involved in any way. And then I became aware that Jesus, the following of Jesus meant not just practicing charity to people around me, but engaging in social justice. It is huge, huge for us. And I don't know how many of you out there today are aware in your own conscience as followers of Christ, as Christians, of what this means and where you are on the journey. But I want to say to you, and it's in the lightning chapter of River of Fire, where I awakened, that the following of Jesus, the following of Christ, meant more than being charitable to people around me, who were mostly other white people in the suburbs that I knew and loved, all worthy of my love and service. It was more than that, that it called me to justice. The awakening to justice is the lightning chapter in River of Fire. And it had to do with that the following of Jesus was meant to be more than being pious, being prayerful, praying for people, charitable to people, but it was about getting engaged in the struggles for social justice that were going on in New Orleans, my own city, where I was in the white suburbs, first teaching kids in Catholic schools, and then being the director of religious education and with adults in a Catholic parish, where less than a 16th of a mile down the road was one of the 10 major housing projects where African American people were living and suffering and being beaten by the police and having no health care and having terrible education in the public schools, and I was oblivious. It's not because I was a bad person.
Right.
It's just that the current that you're in, including the religious current of the church you belong to, the people you go to church with, that it just wasn't part of my consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I call it radical grace that woke me up. That justice meant, of Jesus, of the gospel meant, I couldn't just stay in my comfortable suburban place. I had to move, and I moved into the St. Thomas housing projects in New Orleans, one of 10 where African American people reside.
So when you think about, it's one thing to have a conversation about, I'm going to go help people who are poor or who need better education, all that kind of stuff. And it's a very different thing to talk about people on death row. You know, for example, I'm very much aware, you know, one of the greatest privileges that I get to do as a priest is to preside at funerals. And I always feel that's true, whether I know the person well or I don't, or whether they were remembered as a saintly person or a decent person, a loving person, or someone who would never be described as any of the above. And I remember once I did a funeral in another place, and you know, as a kindness to someone else. And afterwards, someone saw me on the sidewalk when I was close to home, and they said, "I read in the paper you did so and so. You were doing so and so's funeral." I said, "Well, yeah. I mean, I didn't even know this person." And they said, "Well, that he was the most racist person I've ever met," and I didn't know anything about that. And then the person kind of walked on, and it made me wonder about, you know, a lot of people probably think that folks like us should keep arm's length from really bad people. There's people that need help, and then there's really bad people, you know. And I wonder, you know, how does a good nun end up
That is so honest.
hanging out with really
That
bad
is
people?
so honest, Neil.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You know, people say that and they think that and they wonder that.
Yeah. I got to tell you, I never thought much of the funeral thing.
Yes.
Somebody's a racist and you're presiding.
Right.
As a nun, I've never had to do that. You know? But I know this. As I descended into the struggle of poor people, African American people in Louisiana, in New Orleans, when I woke up that the gospel of Jesus meant justice, and then I couldn't say, as I had been saying, I'm apolitical, I'm
Right.
spiritual, I pray for everybody, but I'm not in this political thing, that I'm apolitical. And then to hear, and that's the lightning chapter in River of Fire, when this wonderful nun, Sister Marie Augusta Neal, said to us at a conference, this is the Waking Up chapter, that the gospel of Jesus, see, I always thought, blessed are the poor.
Right.
I thought it meant good news to the poor meant that you were beloved of God. Every hair of your head was numbered. You know, you'd have a great reward in heaven. And here she is, and here's God saying to me, kaboom. Good news to the poor isn't simply that they are loved by God and they'll have a great place in heaven, that they have a right to pursue justice and what is rightfully theirs. The will of God is not that some people are to be rich and some people are to be poor and one day have a great reward in heaven. When their children are dying because they don't have health care before they're 5 years old, what does good news to the poor mean, she said. And I heard for the first time, good news for the poor means they have a right to struggle for what is rightfully theirs. And I realized when I heard this talk, oh my God, I've just been praying for poor people. I've never been involved in their struggle for justice. And that's where God is. I love that Pope Francis said that, you know what a saint is? A saint is somebody that God's energy moves through. God moves through us. And I got it. I woke up and I was so grateful to be awake. And I moved into the neighborhood of African American people. And that's the later chapters of River of Fire, where I realized, where I learned, I sat at the feet of African American people who had been my servants when I grew up. As a young white girl in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, my daddy, a successful lawyer, our big white house in the front, and Ellie and Jesse serving us in the servants' quarters they lived. And Ellen worked in the house with Mama, and Jesse worked in the yard. And I never questioned the Jim Crow laws that kept them subjugated. And, you know, to be compassionate, with us as white people of privilege. It's not that we were bad. Mom and Daddy weren't bad. They were good Catholic people, and Daddy, as a lawyer, helped Ellen and Jesse. Helped Jesse, first of all, get a job at the refinery where he'd get a decent wage. And Ellen and Jesse get property, buy a house. He was a good man. But we never questioned Jim Crow. And it's not that we were bad, it's just that we could not see beyond the boundaries of what culture.
Sure.
See, culture, Neil, you agree. Culture is the teacher, gives us eyes and ears. This is the way things work. What do you think, Neil?
A couple people asked if maybe you could speak up a little bit too, because I think they want to hear every word you have to say.
All right.
I have a question. First of all, I don't know. I know you're a Roman Catholic nun, but have you ever seen the BBC period drama called The Midwife? Because a lot of Episcopalians.
I love the midwife.
Okay, we love it too. All right. So you
Who
don't
does not love the midwife?
So for those who don't know, it's centers on a group of Anglican nuns who's and those who work with them in the East End of London, 1950s, and goes through time. But my favorite character in that series is Sister Monica Joan, who struggles with dementia. And she says, at one point, she says, "The liturgy is of comfort to the disarrayed mind. We need not choose our thoughts. The words are aligned like a rope for us to cling to." And that is such a striking image of clinging onto hope when we most need it. And I'm wondering, based on your experiences with people on death row, for those who are facing executions, what are the things that they cling to as human beings at that point in their life as they're sitting on death row?
Well, I just want to say the same things we cling to.
Mm-hmm.
And I've accompanied 6 human beings to execution. 6. I'm with a man on death row now, Manuel Ortiz. The third of 7 people that I've accompanied who's innocent. He was wrongly convicted. It's so broken. It's one of the things I've learned. And it's the basic, fundamental realization that I'm a child of God, that I have an inalienable dignity which cannot be taken from me. That's what people on death row struggle with. And I got to tell you, on a personal level, I just lost my little brother Louis to COVID. He had a lot of comorbidities, as they say, and but he got COVID. He went to the hospital. At first, they tried to give him oxygen, but it failed. It wasn't enough, and they had to put him on a ventilator, which they had to put him under, so he was unconscious. Right. And he went to God in his sleep.
So sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you.
Can you, I think one of the things for most people that I know, I mean, they may have passionate opinions about, the death penalty and stuff, but really for most people that I know, it's kind of like, it's this abstract idea. It is tied up, as you mentioned at the beginning, with sort of with a sense of justice and what's right and wrong, and how do you rectify something, and when people have different opinions about that. But again, it's an abstract idea for a lot of people that I know. Can you give us any sense of the scale of executions in this country? Because, I mean, most of us really just don't have any sense of that. Like, state versus federal, or I know a lot of people had read headlines about, the number of federal executions recently, and it's just not something most of us track or really know much about.
No, you know what? Because as middle class or affluent white Americans, we don't have to.
Right.
It's not an issue that touches us. Do you know where you live? Where you are in Houston?
Yes. You told me this last week, and I did not know this. I know what you're going to say.
You have been the hotbed
Mhm.
of executions in the United States.
Over
And-
history, is that kind of like over a long period of history? That's true. Is that
Yeah, and it's very recent. Texas has killed 569 human beings. You are the most prolific killing state in the nation. Hands down, you're accountable for 1/3 of all the killings that have happened with the death penalty in the United States. Now, look, I understand everybody tonight that's part of this is a good person. But to awaken to what has happened and what our call is from the gospel of Jesus to be a participant in helping to end it is a huge conversion journey that is ours. And so when I look at you in Houston, me in New Orleans, whom I love,
right?
my state, Louisiana, along with Texas, along with Georgia, along with Alabama, along with Florida, are part of the former slave states that have killed more human beings with the death penalty than all the other states put together. What does this mean for us? What does it mean for our faith? And the death penalty doesn't touch us. It just doesn't. It's not that we bad people. We go on about our lives, but it's one more issue out there. And I mean, maybe for many of us, it's like the big issue is let's stop killing unborn children. Let's make sure that on the abortion issue, we stop the killing. Don't talk to me about these murderers who have killed people in cold blood and deserve to die. What's that got to do with the gospel of Jesus? In terms of priorities, are you telling me I should be concerned about them?
Well, Jesus was executed by the state as an innocent man.
Yeah, but you know how that's used, Neil?
I
Do
know.
you know how that is used? The crucifixion of Jesus? Do you know there's a woman on the Senate in Wyoming a year and a half ago? They are like one blooming vote close to repealing the death penalty. And she gets up to speak and she says, I'm going to vote against this repeal because if Jesus hadn't been executed by the Romans, we wouldn't be freed from our sins. What do we
Right.
make of that? What? The way that the crucifixion of Jesus has been interpreted.
Mhm.
See, we always interpret scripture out of our own experience. All of us do. Supreme Court justices do when they interpret the Constitution, when they look at equal justice under law, when they look at anything. We all, as human beings, when you go to interpret text is never neutral.
Mhm.
We always bring our human experience into the interpretation of text. So this woman, in good faith, well, we're not questioning her motives.
Right.
She said, I got to be for executions because if Jesus hadn't been executed, we wouldn't have been saved from our sins. What kind of God does that portray? What kind of God is behind, I demand the execution of my beloved son in justification because I have been offended. My divine sense of justice has been offended, and I want a death for death.
Yeah,
What
so
kind of
people
God is
misuse religion too. Yeah. I have a question. I have a good question that someone's already sent to me for a little bit later, but I have one other question before we, and other people will be sending other questions in. because you have accompanied people on death row and you've been on the inside, you've been somewhere where most people don't get invited, which is a it sounds strange to say a holy thing to do, but as a priest, I get invited. I get invited into rooms that other people don't get invited into, and that's a sacred thing. That's a sacred thing when that happens. I think one of the most moving things I've ever read, when I was learning about the history of my own family, are some letters that some distant cousin wrote back to his wife and his children as he was awaiting execution by Confederate soldiers in Petersburg in 1864. And he knew he was going to be executed. And he talks about family and faith and wanting his children to be raised as Quakers. He called them the best of all saints. And then there was also a letter from the commanding officer in charge of the execution, responding to a sister of the man who had begged for mercy. And it was really, in a sense, it was a compassionate letter. And it made me wonder, you've seen this from the inside. It made me wonder about all the people who find themselves caught up in a system that they themselves as individuals really don't have power to change. Can you talk to us about the people who carry out executions in our own day? I mean, how does the experience of living with this affect them as human beings? Because that's something that's far removed from most of us.
You have to realize how the death penalty is a secret ritual.
Mm-hmm.
And I've encountered the guards and people who had to carry out executions. Actually, they're becoming more and more prominent. The wardens who've had to carry out executions, and the guards involved in the strapping down of the person to kill them, who are speaking out more. And in Dead Man Walking, actually, I talked about Fenton Cootie. He had been the supervisor on death row in Louisiana at Angola at our state penitentiary. I think he could have done it for the rest of his life. He's a decent guy, kept order on the row, served the breakfast, served the meals, kept the order. And then they moved him to the execution squad, which meant he was to participate directly in the killing of the people that he had come to know on death row. I think that was his downfall. He got to know every man on death row as a person, his childhood, his story. I think that's what did him in. Anyway, after 5 executions, he called me into his office one day and he said, "Sister Helen, I'm going to have to quit this job." He said, "After these executions, I know they're crimes. What they did was unspeakable." But he said, "I come home afterwards and I just get my lazy boy chair and my wife knows not to talk to me. And I just sit there and I know in my gut, I have helped to kill a human being we rendered completely defenseless. And I'm going to have to retire from this job." And he did. He's the only one I met in the system, from the governor, the attorney general, everybody on down, where his conscience finally just said to him, "You cannot participate in this."
I wondered about that. Thank you so much. So we have time for some questions and answers. And one question I had been given a little while back from a member of Palmer. I thought this was really, it's a moral dilemma. I'm curious to see if you can help us wade through. And he's said, and I went back and looked this up too. He said Gallup has some interesting data on opinions in this country about the death penalty over time generally, and about specific questions. Can you talk to us about the moral puzzle posed by a majority of society, that believes that innocent Americans, innocent people created in the image of God, have been executed under the death penalty, but that also still believes, a majority still believes, that the death penalty should nevertheless remain legal? And I'm thinking back also, I began an Easter sermon with the story of Anthony Hinton. I think he had just been released from prison, he turned out to be an innocent man. And there was just something about this image of an innocent person caught up in this who had been, set free, that it was an interesting way to start an Easter sermon. But what about this? What's this contradiction, really? People actually believe that innocent people have been murdered. They've been murdered, and yet don't want to change a system like that.
Yeah, because people say, hey, nothing's perfect.
Right.
We're going to do our best, right? But sometimes mistakes will be made.
But that could be you or me.
Well, no, hardly you or me.
That's right. So talk about
hardly,
that. Yeah. Talk about
hardly
that.
ever you or me.
Right.
We are white people. We have resources, and hardly ever you or me. And that's part of the problem, that only poor people and overwhelmingly people who have killed white people are chosen for death. But here's the thing. We're so disconnected from the system and how it works. The reason I'm talking here with you tonight is because I got drawn right into it, watched these executions and learned how they worked, but realized I'm a privileged person. I'd never be sucked into this. I wouldn't be the victim of this. And that what we have to do is to realize that the death penalty is a government court approved by this U.S. Supreme Court process of selecting people for death that we say is constitutional. I just finished, I was sharing with you and Roger before we came on, the frenetic thing I've been in to get this article written on the death penalty. And President Trump, before he went out of office, look at this, he decided starting in July that he would kill or have executed, all legal, 13 human beings. And he could do it. He had the power to do it from the Gregg v. Georgia decision in 1976 that put the death penalty back. And so he did. He had the power to do it, and he did it. And bang, 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 bang. Starting in July, he killed 13 people. Meanwhile, in the States, we are shutting down the death penalty. Even in Texas, even in Harris County, which used to account for more death penalties in the United States than any other county in the United States, which is the county you reside in and for which you are responsible as those who believe in the gospel of Jesus and want to make that gospel live. We've just had this aberration happen. And even, oh my God, just the life-giving by a thread moments of human beings on that death row in Terre Haute, like Lisa Montgomery. I don't know if you know anything about these cases. Lisa Montgomery was so abused as a child and raped by a stepfather who built a separate room at the back of a trailer to keep raping her and have his friends come in and rape her. And she goes mentally off and she does a terrible crime. Trump zeroes in on her to execute her. And they did. They executed her on January the 12th, 8 days before Joe Biden would come in as president, who had determined and said that he'd end the death penalty. Look at the capriciousness in the way the death is applied to human beings. And that's what I was just writing about before our Zoom tonight, to just say, how can we set up a system a court system in which we decide according to I gotta say this, it's an impossible criteria by which we decide if people live or die. Supposedly, it's for the worst of the worst murderers. How do we determine what's the worst of the worst? You kill my mama. Well, you say, sorry, there are not enough aggravating circumstances. She was just killed individual by some intruder, but there's got to be aggravating circumstances. Was it during a felony? Were they trying to rob her? That an impossible criteria coupled with giving over to the prosecutors complete discretionary power to seek death or not. And you get to the federal level and you get to President Trump, who had just reinvigorated a whole thing of law and order before he left office. And he had the power and he started killing people.
Let me ask you a question related to that. Someone asked this question in the Q&A box about was, I guess, wondering or stating U.S. executes more than any other country except who? They're wondering if it was Russia and Iran, or do you know the answer to that?
Yeah, it's Iran, it's Iraq.
Okay.
We are in the outliers in terms of human rights and the death penalty. Over the 40 years ago, a very few countries did not execute people, but the UN Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, which gave the right to life, Article 3, inalienable human right to life. It's taken a Catholic church. I don't know how you Episcopalians are doing. I imagine you're doing all right because you generally are with it. You generally are with it. But it took 1,500 years of dialogue for the Catholic Church to reach a position in 2018 that under no circumstances, no matter how terrible the crime, you can't give government the right to execute. And that has a long tradition. When we needed civil authority to be in charge, we didn't have prisons to execute people or to terminate the lives of people who were dangerous because there was no way to incapacitate them because you didn't have prisons. But it took the Catholic Church dialogue 1,500 years to come to that position of saying we cannot give over to government the absolute right to choose death for human beings, no matter how grave the crime. We grow, we evolve as a community as we come into new consciousness and conscience about the moral issues of our day.
Sure, bishops used to have their own jails too, didn't they? I think in England. I have a question that's a little bit related to, I asked you about the people involved in the executions themselves, but this is an interesting question that you would know something about personally. Someone says, I'm a lawyer and know firsthand the injustices in the legal system to the point that I can't physically, emotionally, or spiritually watch any movie or TV show that takes place in prison. How can I reconcile that injustice with the reality that this exists? Now, how do you take care of yourself and other people? People are sometimes called to do hard things and they can do that, but how do they deal with some of the stuff that lives with them? Even if they're not kind of in the machinery of something, but they're kind of around it and they're constantly exposed to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. First of all, to that lawyer, I understand that you can't look at movies. See, these lawyers that are in there trying to save lives against a huge, huge court system that just wants to uphold death. As we have seen in all these Trump executions, the Supreme Court just out of just approved, rubber stamped every execution, even working through the night to overcome lower court decisions that those executions can happen. I understand that as a lawyer close to it and trying to defend your clients up against all odds, that you can't look at those movies. I really understand that. You want to know what keeps me going? As I say in River of Fire, it's in the prelude, I witnessed the fire. I watched a man be electrocuted to death. And it set my soul on fire. Every religious leader in Louisiana in 1984 was nowhere near the death penalty. And I want to just say this about church groups. I got to tell you, it's not too happy about church groups and these issues that affect poor people and our races and the whole thing. I mean, there's certain social issues we real cool about, and we get on, and we have our, our charitable organizations that give food to the poor. We do charity really well, but justice, we have a lot to learn because we're privileged and we're removed. Most of us are. And so when you take no religious leaders protested the killing of Patrick Sonnier that night in 1984. But I saw it. And what I saw set my soul on fire, a fire that burns with me still. And when we read the prophetic tradition in the Old Testament and the New, it's people who see something and are set on fire by it and begin to work to change it. Mm-hmm. Religion is all about transformation. All of us. First, we get transformed, we come awake, our consciences are moved, and we begin to act. We've been paralyzed in a lot of ways because we get all this information coming into us through Google and all this stuff on our iPhone. And the more we see, the more information we get, the more we can be overwhelmed, and we paralyzed. The subtext of River of Fire is not only becoming an activist, but becoming hopeful and acting in hope. Hope is an active verb. When we see something, we begin to act. I really, really hope that what comes out of this conversation tonight is that every single person who is a Texas resident will be moved to work to end the death penalty. Your state, Texas, has killed 569 human beings. And when we look around where most of the states are shutting death down, you are still killing people. You have 5 people scheduled for execution in 21. What has that got to do with you? What has that got to do with the call to live out faith in the gospel of Jesus? Is it well? Mm-hmm. Sorry it's happening, but well,
Someone asked a question. It goes a little bit back to how you began with, acknowledging the awfulness of the crimes and wondering, they were given an example of someone who, before he was executed in 1992 here in Texas, murdered another death row inmate, beat and raped another. In other words, there was a lot of violence and all that happened actually in the prison before all that. And one of the questions was, if there's someone like that, and maybe this is about the prisons themselves. I mean, what do you say?
No, it's more than that. It's more about than the prisons themselves. What about people who killed children? Mm-hmm. What about Lisa Montgomery, who was executed by Trump, who had strangled to death a pregnant woman and cut the fetus out of her womb, went home, claimed to her husband she'd given birth while shopping, claimed the baby as her own. What about her? Mm-hmm. What about people who kill elderly people? What about people who, and we come to, what is the death penalty about? The enormity of the crime. Well, look what they did. But then it turns to us. What are we about? So what do we do to the people who do these enormous, unspeakable crimes? Do we try to imitate them? Do we say, well, they kill, we're going to kill them? What's the gospel of Jesus got to say in this? What does the gospel have to say in this? And then the more we see, as I've just written, and about how when we set out as a society entrusting over to our government, the discretion to seek death or not, setting an impossible criteria that it's only for the worst of the worst. Nobody knows what that means. The worst of the worst. Not your ordinary murder, not your garden variety murder. Somebody kills my mother, unique, irreplaceable in the world. Is that not the worst of the worst? How do you determine what's the worst of the worst? And then turning over to the discretion of prosecutors. And you just look at Harris County. Look at your record in Texas of all the people that you have killed. And
Right.
I got to say to you that when people are executed in your state, your name is on that gurney. Your name is on that electric chair. And if you are not working to change it, you're part of it.
You have given us some homework and a lot of things to learn about ourselves, regardless of people's opinions about what we've been talking about. And I think that would be an important thing, I know, for myself to do. And I really appreciate you shining a light on some of that for me too. I see Roger's back. There we go.
I'm back, and wow. Maybe Neil, if you can mute for a second, I'm hearing a little echo. I just want to say thank you again for being here tonight. I know this was difficult for people to hear, but very important, and I'm grateful to you for that. I want to say to you on behalf of our congregation that we are so sorry for the loss of your brother, and we will hold him and you and your family in our prayers. And we are so sorry. And thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight. We've had several people say we need part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5 of this conversation. And what I can offer to the congregation is to let you know that on Sunday, during our Sunday school formation hour, we are going to have a conversation following this conversation. So folks who are interested in participating in that, please do. Excuse me. And I also want to just give a little bit of a shout out. I don't know that we shared this with you, but Palmer has a group that has been working hard, and it's some passionate folks that are involved, and it's PAR, and it's Palmer Assisting Reentry. And it is working with folks who have been through the prison system, who are being, sort of resettled and reintroduced into the community. And so this is you have made the night of many of these folks who are working diligently and very hard for this. And
good for you.
So thank you again. And there's not much more I can say except thank you. And this is going to be recorded. This was recorded and it will be made available. We will share this and folks can listen to it again. Yes. So thank you.
Thank you, Roger.
You're so welcome.
Thank you, everybody who's out there. Great to be with you.
Yeah. Well, take care of yourself and blessings.
Blessings on you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.